You're listening to Puma Podcast. This special series was developed with the support of Journalism Fund Europe.
Welcome to this special series by Teka Teka. Puma Podcast produced this in time for the 10th anniversary of Typhoon Haiyan. Filipinos know it better as Yolanda.
This is probably one of the top 12 of all storms on this planet.
I'm Bella Perez Rubio, and in this series,
I told Marian, "Where's your daughter?" She said, "I dropped her again, Ma."
a decade after one of the strongest typhoons of the 21st century so far, we tell you a story of survival, recovery, and promises of recovery that have fallen short or that have gone undelivered. November 8, 2013. Typhoon Haiyan, codename Yolanda in the Philippines, will by the end of the day prove to be one of the deadliest storms ever recorded. The Blanza family, gathered the night before Yolanda was forecast to make landfall. They had been warned. The whole country was warned. And yet nobody was fully aware of the devastation that would actually be delivered.
We didn't know what a storm surge was. We had a laptop, so we were trying to look up clips of storm surges on YouTube, but it just looked like regular flooding.
There's also a larger story of post-disaster recovery. Governments and institutions from all corners of the world pledged over $1 billion in aid, with promises to build back better. Yet a decade later, we're left with a simple but loaded question. Where did that money go? Interviews, expert insight, and the situation on the ground unravel the complexities of rehabilitation efforts.
Not better, it's better. Because when you speak of build back better, you do not go back or restore pre-Yolanda vulnerability.
On the evening of November 7, 2013, the Blanza family gathered in their home. It was by the coast. Tacloban city is on the eastern front of an island, one of more than 7,000 that make up the Philippine archipelago. Tacloban is literally at the front line of every typhoon that comes barreling westward from the Pacific.
People in the Visayas, parts of southern Luzon and Bicol prepare for the Friday morning's landfall of Super Typhoon Yolanda. According to the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center, which is based in Hawaii, Super Typhoon Yolanda is likely the strongest typhoon to form on the planet this year, and not only here in the country, posing an extremely serious...
They were following the news. Haiyan was hours away from entering the country.
Malacanang urges residents in areas in the path of powerful Typhoon Yolanda to heed the advice of authorities and move out of danger zones.
Their matriarch, Marianita Blanza, called on her daughter, Marian, to head home. Marian, a young mother to a 5-year-old daughter, was working at a fast food restaurant nearby.
Tinawagan ko na siya na pupunta tayo sa ibang lugar kasi nga yung storm surge.
I told her to come home because we were being ordered to leave because of the incoming storm surge. But we didn't know what a storm surge was. We had a laptop, so we were trying to look up clips of storm surges on YouTube, but it just looked like regular flooding.
Parang baha lang ba siya, gaganon.
They moved to a relative's house, a little further away from the sea.
We couldn't sleep. We stayed up all night telling stories because the wind was so strong. There was no rain, just wind. It was so quiet. And other people nearby were drinking. We didn't notice that at midnight, the sea was receding.
Umatras na pala yung dagat.
November 8, 5 a.m. They started to make the rounds, checking on Marianita's siblings who lived nearby. One by one, the wind carried away their roofs. 8 a.m. Haiyan was in Tacloban City. Before they knew it, their homes were filling up with water. They had to break their jam gates open just to get out. The Blanzas and some 30 other families took shelter in one of the largest houses in the neighborhood. But its roof was blown away too, and it was quickly filling up with water. Marianita's daughter, Marian, was carrying her 5-year-old, trying to keep her head above water.
Ito namang cable wire dyan na makapal sa street.
A thick cable wire on the street fell. It hit Marian's hand and she dropped her daughter. She said, "Mom, I dropped Pikat." Pikat was her baby's nickname. I swam for the child and picked her up, but she was weak. I placed her on the roof that was floating. I told him to run for the computer shop. I didn't know she wasn't able to get the child because she fell again. And I was holding on to my other grandchild.
Ako naman, hawak-hawak ko yung isa kong apo.
For hours, they held on to whatever they could, as wind and water tried to wash them away. Marianita was so exhausted that she was fighting sleep. When they finally managed to get out of the flooded building, she started a head count.
Hinahanap ko na yung mga apo ko, tapos yung anak ko, ito siya, ang laki ng sugat niya.
I was looking for my grandchildren. I saw my daughter Marian, and her wound was so big. She was bleeding so much, and she was pale. I thought to myself, if we don't get to the hospital, she might not make it. I was scared for her. And then I remembered my granddaughter. I was looking for her and couldn't find her. I told Marian, "Where's your daughter?" She said, "I dropped her again, Ma." She was crying and crying for her daughter. To calm her down, I said, "She's there, safe in another house." But I knew it wasn't
ko lang
true.
siya pinapakalma.
Later, Marianita would learn that her brother and her daughter, Marian's older sister, had also died. In the weeks that followed, the world would watch harrowing footage of homes being washed away. Journalists from all over the world would describe the lingering stench of death in the air as they walked a completely flattened Tacloban city. In its wake, Typhoon Yolanda left more than 6,000 dead and tens of thousands homeless. Many of the bodies were pulled from the streets and fields. Most of the homes were stripped of roofs and walls, down to their already flimsy foundations. Cameras would capture the desolate looks in the eyes of survivors, many of them injured, cramped into makeshift evacuation centers. Ten years later, buildings are standing again in Tacloban City. The sound of children playing fills the streets. Death is no longer a stench in the air, but a phantom pain. 10,000 families have been moved away from the coast, away from the city center, and away from their livelihoods, and into housing that even the local government admits is substandard. Nearly 4,000 of these families are still waiting on their houses. Immediately after Haiyan struck, governments around the world pledged around 73.3 billion pesos, or $1.3 billion worth of aid to survivors. That's according to our budget department. A decade later, we wanted to find out where that money went. So we partnered with Danwatch, an investigative news outlet based in Denmark, to help us track European assistance. Here's Sandra Rasmussen of Danwatch.
So, we're kind of in a dead end at the moment, the money trail from the EU. We can say that they did send money, but not if they did any audit reports or monitoring whether or not the money was spent accordingly to the terms. We don't know what the terms were.
We also visited Tacloban City twice this year, once in January and once in October. Both times, we spoke to an expert on the government's rehabilitation program there.
I'm Lady Lynn Lim Mangada. I am from Tacloban City, Philippines. I teach at UP Tacloban College. I've been teaching for almost 30 years. And I was here when Haiyan devastated the place.
Since 2015, Professor Mangada's main area of research has been the Yolanda Permanent Housing Program, the largest and most significant part of the government's rehabilitation effort.
I think it's really challenging and problematic. Challenging in the sense that, for instance, in the NHA,
That's the National Housing Authority.
or state-sponsored housing project, meaning it's being delivered by the government, you would notice that materials that were used were substandard, and a lot of beneficiaries would complain about the defective comfort rooms and the walls that do not have steel bars, or others mentioned about instead of steel bars, the contractor would use the bamboo. And then, of course, several cracks in the housing units. And then, very problematic because the government did not consider, for instance, the number of family members that would be living in that particular housing unit. So it's like one size fits all. So whether you're 5, whether you're 3 or 7, you will stay in that limited dwelling unit. Also, there was no provision or consideration for elderly, for people with special needs or with disabilities, because it's just a space where it serves as a dining room, a bedroom, a kitchen, everything.
Tacloban City Mayor Alfred Romualdez himself has called at least 70% of the national government housing for Yolanda survivors substandard. I first met Marian Blanza in January 2023. She told me about losing her first child, Micaela, the 5-year-old nicknamed Picat. She was still living in that same house by the coast where tragedy struck all those years ago. In 2016, they received socialized housing from the government in Villa Diana. It's one of several resettlement sites north of the city center. But the house was riddled with several of the defects Professor Mangada described. And in Villa Diana, residents have had no running water ever since they moved in 7 years ago. A universal problem for relocated Haiyan survivors has also been the lack of livelihood up north. Commerce happens in the city center, by the coast, which is about a half-hour drive away. Most of their income was going to the cost of the daily commute and the gallons of water they had delivered several times a week. So Marian and her husband, along with their 2 children born after Haiyan, moved back to the coast. That's where I stumbled across her in January. She and her family stood out among the abandoned skeletons of homes ravaged by Haiyan in 2013.
They say desperate people hold on even when it's hard. Even if the trauma, the phobia is there, I'll swallow it rather than suffer in Villa Diana. Because it's hard there.
But when I checked on her again in October, things had gotten worse. She was gaunt. She had shed plenty of weight. She looked exhausted.
I was diagnosed with lupus in May. I kept asking my doctor if it was life-threatening, and she said yes if it's left untreated. It affects your heart, your kidney, which is why my body was aching. But now I'm slowly accepting it because they say it's hard if you don't. I guess I'll keep fighting until I can, until God decides to take me. But hopefully not yet, because my children are still young.
I was able to meet Marian's mother, Marianita, in October because she moved in with them full-time. Here she is again.
Starting when she got sick, she couldn't be left alone because she couldn't move at the time. She was always lying down, so no one was around to help out. So that's why we're on standby here. Only her husband works.
When I met Marian in January, her family was a double-income household. She worked at a department store nearby. Her husband worked at a Home Depot. They were struggling to stay afloat, but they had at least managed to cut down on the cost of commuting by moving back to the city center.
I'm struggling with my situation too, because I can't work. If only there was a way I could earn, but it all just goes to my medicine. Now I just bear with it, even though sometimes I don't want to anymore.
Now they live off of her husband's daily salary of 375 pesos. That's about $7. Marian's medicine cost them 200 pesos, or around $3 per day. They still have to buy their water in containers, which cost them about 60 pesos, about $1 per day. They borrow money just to be able to eat. It's hard to believe, but in some ways, Marian and her family are lucky that they even have the option to move back to the coast. The area where they live, Barangay 54A, is now a no-build zone because of its proximity to the water. But because relatives of theirs own the land, the government will have to buy them out to get them to leave. They would happily accept the money, but say they've yet to receive an offer. They still have that house in Villa Diana, one of the government housing sites up north. But they only go back there during typhoons. It's become common practice for many who have decided to move back to the coast for work.
Oh, may ginagawa yung gobyerno pero ganun pa rin kasi wala naman na kami sa pabahay pero nababalita.
Yes, the government is doing something, but nothing's changed. We may not be in socialized housing, but we hear news that it's the same. There's still no water or it's expensive. And there's still plenty of people who don't live there because it's far, there's no work, and their jobs are here, downtown, by the sea. It's the same for us. We don't want to go back because what will we do there? Especially now that I'm sick.
Anong gagawin namin dun?
We are not just settling for the minimum. We do not want our countrymen merely to make do. We are taking this chance not just to rebuild what was destroyed, but again, more importantly, to build back better.
That was former President Benigno Aquino III, speaking a month after Haiyan devastated the Philippines. He was halfway into his term at the time. He's since passed away, and another administration has come and gone. With the housing program still unfinished, the promise to build back better has been passed down to the administration of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Here's what Professor Mangada, a dogged observer of the rehabilitation effort, has to say about it a decade later.
Not better, it's bitter. Because when you speak of build back better, you do not go back or restore pre-Yolanda vulnerability. Diba? You build forward. You want to improve. There must be changes. I do not know. Maybe the change was that the people in the coast, the survivors were just transferred to a higher ground, a safe ground. But as far as, their life, in fact, they would say that they were earning more when they were in the coast than where they are currently residing. So I don't know what is the better there because if you don't have water, if you don't have good income, what is better there?
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. Carl Dave Sayat edited this episode. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior news editor is Veronica Uy. You might be wondering, how can the government's housing project still be unfinished and substandard when it had at least $1 billion to aid in the rehabilitation effort? Stay tuned for the next episode of this special series, where we walk you through the process of trying to track that money. Thanks for listening.
This special series was developed with the support of Journalism Fund Europe.